Vincent's story is not about madness alone. It is about what the human mind can do when pain turns into meaning. For more stories where brilliance meets breakdown, subscribe and keep exploring the mind behind history. Vincent van Gogh was born in 1853 in the small Dutch village of Zundert. His family was religious, strict and quiet. His father was a Protestant minister. His mother was reserved and often ill. The household valued discipline more than affection. From childhood, Vincent showed two sides. He was gentle and deeply emotional, but also restless and unpredictable. He stared at people longer than was comfortable. He drew constantly, sometimes until his hands cramped. Teachers described him as intense and withdrawn. At 16, he joined an art dealer's firm in The Hague. It was his first contact with the world of paintings and buyers. He traveled to London and Paris as an apprentice. He saw museums, galleries, and street life that fascinated him. He also began to show signs of emotional instability. Letters from this time reveal loneliness and obsession with faith. When a love interest rejected him, his mood crashed. He stopped eating and barely slept. He wrote to his brother Theo that life felt empty and that he no longer trusted himself. This pattern of emotional highs and sudden lows would follow him forever. After being dismissed from the art firm, he tried to become a preacher. He lived among poor miners in Belgium, giving away his possessions. He starved himself to imitate their suffering. The church dismissed him for taking religion too far. He turned to art as a way to express his faith through color and light. By his late 20s, Vincent was fully committed to painting. He believed his work could heal the human soul, but his health was fragile. He suffered long periods of exhaustion and despair. He drank coffee and smoked constantly. He walked for miles each day, often talking to himself. Early paintings from this time were dark and heavy. He used deep browns and blacks to show farmers and workers bent over the soil. He wrote that these people reminded him of his own struggles. The paintings were full of emotion, but few understood them. Modern psychologists looking back at this period see early warning signs. Vincent displayed mood swings, social withdrawal, obsessive focus, and erratic sleep. These symptoms fit the early stage of a bipolar or schizoaffective disorder. But in the 1880s, no one used those terms. Doctors spoke of nerves and melancholy. His letters to Theo show growing anxiety. He described feeling a terrible need for religion and an equally terrible need for love. He wrote that colors seemed louder and more alive than before. Sometimes he painted for days without stopping. Other times he could not lift a brush. The neuroscience of creativity today helps explain part of this. During hypomanic states, the brain floods with dopamine. That chemical increases focus and reward response. For artists, it can make ideas flow rapidly and color perception feel more vivid. But when dopamine falls, depression sets in. The same brain that creates also collapses. Vincent's early years reveal this cycle. He painted with obsession, then fell into despair. He searched for meaning in religion, then rejected it. He sought companionship, then pushed people away. His mind never found balance. In 1886, he moved to Paris to live with Theo. This was the most important shift in his life. Paris was full of color, movement, and new art styles. Impressionism was replacing dark realism. Painters like Monet and Pissarro used light and quick strokes to capture emotion. Vincent absorbed it all. He studied Japanese prints and bright pigments that had just entered Europe. He experimented with complementary colors. He painted flowers and streets in thick, expressive layers. His palette changed from brown to yellow, blue, and orange. But along with energy came agitation. Theo wrote that Vincent talked faster, slept less, and drank too much. He was fascinated by the connection between color and emotion. He said yellow was the color of hope. Blue was peace. Red was love and violence together. These associations reflect how his brain merged feeling with vision. Neuroscientists today call this cross-wiring of senses synesthesia. Some people hear colors or see sounds. In artists, it can translate emotion directly into image. For Vincent, every color was alive, and every line carried emotion. His brain turned sensory overload into art, but that same overload could be unbearable. Crowds, noise, and rejection triggered anxiety. He left Paris in 1888 seeking peace in the southern town of Arles. He dreamed of building a community of artists. He wrote to Theo that he wanted to paint sunlight that would make people feel warm again. Arles offered him open skies and bright fields. He worked obsessively from sunrise to sunset. In a few months he produced hundreds of sketches and dozens of paintings. Color became his language, but isolation deepened the cracks in his mind. The locals thought he was strange. He talked to himself and often wandered at night with candles attached to his hat. He painted quickly, as if racing against his own thoughts. Neighbors began to avoid him. When his friend Paul Gauguin came to stay, the two argued constantly. Tension and lack of sleep pushed him toward the first major breakdown. He began hearing voices and felt someone was following him. He became paranoid that Gauguin planned to abandon him. One night the fear exploded. Vincent confronted Gauguin in the street with a razor in his hand. Then he turned the blade on himself. He cut off part of his left ear and wrapped it in paper. He delivered it to a woman at a nearby brothel. No one understood why. Later he said he could not remember the moment. This single act defined his public image as the mad painter. But to neurologists, it shows an acute psychotic break, likely triggered by sleep deprivation, alcohol, and underlying mental illness. His mind had lost the boundary between thought and reality. After the incident, the police confined him to the hospital at Arles. Doctors diagnosed him with acute mania with generalized delirium. He recovered partially within weeks and begged to return to painting. He said art was the only thing that kept him alive. This pattern of collapse and recovery would repeat for the rest of his life. In each calm period, he produced work of astonishing power. Each painting carried the energy of a brain struggling to make sense of itself. Part 1 ends here, with Vincent standing at the edge of Arles, holding his sketchbook, looking at the yellow fields. The voices had quieted for now, but they would return. In the next part, his mind and his art would merge completely. Vincent returned to his small yellow house in Arles after the ear incident. The walls were covered with paintings. The smell of turpentine and oil paint filled every room. He painted even when his bandages were still fresh. He told Theo that work was his medicine. The townspeople no longer trusted him. Children threw stones at his door. Neighbors signed petitions to remove him. The police called him dangerous. He was alone and exhausted. In early 1889, he admitted himself to the St. Paul Asylum in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. It was a quiet place, surrounded by olive trees and lavender fields. There were barred windows, stone floors, and long, echoing halls. He was given a small room with a bed and an easel. The doctors let him paint in the garden. The asylum staff described him as polite but restless. He spoke quickly and often lost his train of thought. He painted for hours and then suddenly stopped and stared at the wall. Sometimes he would hum or whisper to himself. He feared another episode was coming. Modern psychiatry would describe these as prodromal symptoms, early signs that the brain is moving toward psychosis. He felt the change before it happened. In letters, he wrote that a storm was forming inside him. He said he heard voices that spoke kindly and others that mocked him. At night, he could not tell if he was dreaming or awake. During these episodes, perception changes. The visual cortex becomes overactive. Patterns, movement, and color intensity increase. To Vincent, the world shimmered. The lines of the trees seemed alive. Stars pulsed and rotated. Every sound carried weight. When he painted Starry Night, he was not just recording what he saw. He was translating the sensory overload of his brain onto canvas. Neuroscientists studying the painting today find mathematical accuracy in the turbulence patterns he painted. The swirls match real equations of fluid motion. It means his perception during psychosis was not random chaos. It was an altered form of order. This paradox fascinates scientists. Brain scans of people with schizophrenia show overconnectivity between visual and emotional centers. The same neural crosstalk that causes hallucinations can also enhance creative association. It lets the mind combine ideas that others would never link. In most people, this causes confusion. In Vincent, it created innovation. At Saint-Rémy, he painted constantly between attacks. He completed more than 150 works in a single year. Each painting was a record of his changing brain state. When he was calm, his strokes were long and smooth. When symptoms rose, his brushwork became circular and intense. One doctor at the asylum wrote that Vincent used art as a form of self-therapy. He seemed calmer after painting. When he could not paint, he became agitated and paranoid. This fits modern research on art and the brain. Creating art activates dopamine pathways similar to meditation or music. It can stabilize mood and regulate stress hormones. For Vincent, painting was literally keeping his chemistry balanced, yet the illness was never far away. He described sudden waves of confusion that came without warning. He said the colors around him began to move, and sounds turned into shapes. These episodes could last minutes or days. Afterward, he remembered them vaguely, as if waking from a vivid dream. Neurologists today debate the exact diagnosis. Some point to temporal lobe epilepsy, combined with bipolar disorder. Others see clear traits of schizophrenia. Whatever the label, the brain process was similar. His limbic system flooded with dopamine and glutamate. Sensory input overloaded the cortex. His perception detached from normal boundaries. During remission, he saw the world with extraordinary sensitivity. He noticed patterns in grass, reflections in water, and movement in light. He said painting helped him translate the chaos into something understandable. That need for control through art is common in people with creative psychosis. The act of making gives form to the formless. Theo supported him through letters and money. Theo's encouragement was his only lifeline. He told Vincent to keep painting, even during his worst episodes. Their bond shows how vital social connection is in managing mental illness. Studies today prove that isolation worsens psychotic symptoms. Vincent lived proof of that relationship. Still, the stigma around him grew. Visitors to the asylum stared at him like a curiosity. He felt shame, but also acceptance. He wrote that madness was a disease of civilization itself. He believed the modern world had lost touch with nature and empathy. In that sense, he saw his illness as both curse and message. By mid-1889, his health improved enough for supervised walks outside the asylum walls. He painted olive trees, cypress forests, and wheat fields. He described the motion of the leaves as breathing. Every line vibrated with energy. His paintings from this period are studies in neural perception. Each brushstroke captures movement as the eye and brain misfire together. The science of vision explains part of this effect. During psychosis, the thalamus filters sensory information poorly. The brain receives too much detail. Instead of simplifying, it processes everything at once. That is why his landscapes look alive. He was recording too much reality, not too little. Even within confinement, his productivity astonished the doctors. They saw that his creative bursts coincided with early recovery phases after breakdowns. This fits modern data showing that creative insight often peaks in transitional mental states, when the brain is reorganizing after stress. To neuroscientists, Van Gogh's life offers rare evidence of the link between mental instability and creative output. The same circuits that produced hallucinations also enhanced imagination. The cost was enormous. Each masterpiece drained his mind further. He once wrote that he painted to hold on to life itself. Every canvas was a negotiation between survival and surrender. By the end of 1889, he was mentally and physically exhausted. Theo persuaded him to move closer to Paris for better care. In May 1890, Vincent left Saint-Rémy for the small village of Auvers-sur-Oise. He carried his paints, his canvases, and a fragile calm that would not last. The next chapter of his life would bring both his most brilliant and his final works. In part 3, we enter Auvers, where his last 60 days became a race between genius and death. In May 1890, Vincent arrived in the village of Auvers-sur-Oise. It was a quiet place near Paris, surrounded by wheat fields and riverbanks. He wanted peace and stability after the asylum. His brother Theo arranged for him to be under the care of Dr. Paul Gachet. Dr. Gachet was a physician who treated artists and believed in the power of creativity. He also suffered from depression himself. Vincent wrote to Theo that the doctor looked as ill as he was. They connected through their shared fragility. Over's was calm, but Vincent's mind was still restless. He painted almost every day, walking into the fields with his easel and paints. The sky was wide and full of clouds that seemed to move endlessly. He painted them in thick, swirling layers, each line alive with motion. In 70 days he completed more than 70 works. He painted the church at Auvers, the fields under stormy skies, and the portrait of Dr. Gachet. Each painting shows his changing mood. Some are calm and blue, others chaotic and yellow with nervous energy. Color had become his language for emotion. Modern neuroscientists studying these works see a pattern in his use of rhythm and repetition. The brushstrokes follow fractal geometry similar to natural turbulence. It mirrors how the brain organizes chaos during cognitive overload. The same neural patterns appear in EEG scans of people experiencing hallucinations. Vincent's art had become a real-time map of his brain function. The overactivity in his visual cortex expressed itself through patterns of energy. Instead of describing delusion, he painted it. His canvas became a snapshot of his nervous system. He wrote that painting calmed him, yet his letters from this time also mention a deep sadness. He feared losing Theo's support as Theo's health declined. Theo's new baby meant money was tight. Vincent felt like a burden again. He told Theo that he sensed the end was near. From a clinical perspective, these thoughts match the depressive phase of a bipolar cycle. After long bursts of creative mania, his energy collapsed. The same dopamine that once fueled inspiration now dropped sharply. The mind that could not stop painting became the mind that could no longer go on. In June, he painted Wheatfield with crows. The painting shows a dark path cutting through fields under a violent sky. Black crows fly in chaotic circles. There is no visible horizon. Art historians see it as a farewell. Psychologists see it as a visual expression of despair and entrapment. Research on art and emotion confirms that depressive brains often prefer low contrast and broken symmetry. Vincent's final works show that shift clearly. They lose their earlier harmony and become fragmented. He was recording his mental collapse through color, yet his technique remained astonishing. Even in suffering, his brain retained precision. This supports modern studies, showing that creative skill relies on long-term memory networks that stay intact even during psychosis. His ability to control the brush while his perception failed is one of the mysteries of his genius. On July 27, 1890, Vincent walked into the wheat fields carrying a pistol. He had borrowed it from the innkeeper for what he said was self-protection. He shot himself in the chest. The wound was not immediately fatal. He managed to walk back to the inn and lay on his bed. When Theo arrived the next day, Vincent said, "It is how I wish to go." He died 2 days later. He was 37 years old. After his death, his paintings remained unsold and largely unknown. Theo died 6 months later from illness, and the two brothers were buried side by side. Modern neuroscience views Vincent's story as a case of creative hyperconnectivity. Brain scans of highly creative individuals show unusual communication between the frontal and temporal lobes. This allows abstract ideas to merge with sensory imagery. In psychosis, the same connections become uncontrolled. The difference between genius and madness is the brain's ability to filter those signals. Vincent's filters failed, but his discipline turned that failure into beauty. His art is what neuroscientists call structured chaos, where random neural noise becomes organized through repetition and focus. He was not painting madness. He was painting order emerging from madness. Psychologists studying his letters note how self-aware he was. He often described his symptoms with remarkable clarity. He knew when an episode was approaching. He tried to manage it through painting, routine, and walks. He lacked the medicine that could have stabilized him, but he understood the pattern. Today, his life is used in medical education to teach empathy toward patients with chronic mental illness. It shows that intelligence and psychosis can coexist. It reminds doctors that creativity can be a form of survival. The neuroscience of genius does not glorify his suffering. It explains how extreme sensitivity in perception and emotion can create both art and agony. Vincent's brain processed color, sound, and emotion as one unified experience. That ability gave him access to visions that others could not imagine. It also made everyday life unbearable. His death was not the end of his message. In the years after, his paintings began to gain attention. People who saw them felt a strange familiarity. They said his skies looked alive, his colors felt emotional. Without knowing it, they were responding to neural truths embedded in the art. He had captured how the brain actually perceives the world under intense emotion. Vincent once wrote, "I dream my paintings and then I paint my dreams." Neuroscience now confirms that creative minds use the same brain regions for dreaming and imagination. He was literally turning dreams into daylight. His legacy changed both art and science. Art historians saw a new path of expression. Doctors saw a new way to understand the mind. He turned suffering into data for humanity. In Part 4, we will look at what modern neuroscience has learned from his illness. We will explore how creativity, brain chemistry, and perception connect. The story of Van Gogh continues inside the laboratories that study the biology of imagination. More than a century after Van Gogh's death, scientists began to study what his brain might have been doing during those years of chaos and creation. His letters gave researchers the kind of record that no medical patient had ever left before. They described sensations, emotions, and hallucinations in remarkable detail. Each line became evidence of how the creative brain behaves under stress. Neuroscience today sees creativity not as a single talent, but as a network. It involves the frontal lobes, the limbic system, and the visual cortex working together. When these areas communicate freely, the brain can link unrelated ideas. That process is called divergent thinking. It allows new concepts to appear from old memories. It is the root of innovation in both science and art. In people with bipolar or psychotic traits, this communication can become extreme. Instead of gentle connections, there is a flood of signals. The brain becomes hyper-associative. It connects everything to everything else. Ideas come faster than they can be organized. That can feel like inspiration or chaos, depending on how the person responds. Vincent lived in that flood every day. His letters show racing thoughts, rapid mood shifts, and deep emotional awareness. Modern brain imaging studies reveal that such states often activate the same circuits responsible for imagination. The difference between a visionary and a patient in crisis is control. Vincent had just enough structure to translate his storm into color. Researchers studying bipolar disorder find that creative achievement is higher among people with mild or managed symptoms. In the manic phase, dopamine surges. Attention expands. Patterns become visible that most people ignore. This dopamine state makes the world feel full of meaning. That same flood, when unchecked, can slide into delusion. Van Gogh's art captures that fine line. Every brushstroke reflects heightened perception balanced on the edge of breakdown. He painted not what the eye saw, but what the mind experienced when dopamine turned vision electric. Neuroscientists call this perceptual amplification. The visual system exaggerates contrast and motion. That is why his skies move and his trees twist with energy. During psychosis, the prefrontal cortex, which filters reality, becomes less active. The limbic system, which handles emotion, takes over. The result is a world driven by feeling instead of logic. That brain state can be terrifying. In Van Gogh's hands, it became art. One modern theory, called the predictive coding model, helps explain it. The brain constantly predicts what it will see next. In psychosis, those predictions overpower sensory input. The brain starts to see what it expects rather than what exists. Vincent's swirls and distortions may be visual predictions leaking into perception. He painted the conflict between expectation and reality, creative people show similar neural flexibility in controlled settings. Functional MRI scans of painters show less inhibition in frontal networks during flow states. That temporary quieting of control regions allows spontaneous association. It is the same mechanism seen in mild psychosis. The difference is intensity and duration. Art therapy programs now use this knowledge to help patients with schizophrenia and trauma. By externalizing chaotic perception into images, the brain can regain structure. Vincent discovered this form of therapy a century before psychiatry did. When he said art was his salvation, it was a literal truth. His painting sessions reduced stress hormones and restored focus. Modern medicine also confirms that his symptoms were not simply caused by mental illness. Toxicology studies on his paints show that he was exposed to lead, turpentine, and thujone from absinthe. All of these can cause neurological damage and hallucinations. The combination of chemical exposure and mental vulnerability magnified his instability, yet his ability to work through such conditions shows extraordinary cognitive resilience. His brain adapted. It found stability through repetition and ritual. He painted at the same times each day. He used consistent color patterns. These routines acted as primitive behavioral therapy. They provided predictability to a chaotic mind. Recent research into flow states confirms that repetition and immersion can shift the brain into a balanced mode. The default network quiets and time perception fades. Pain and fear lessen. Creativity and focus rise. Vincent lived inside that state for hours every day. It was his natural medicine. His paintings also reveal advanced visual processing. The precision of his turbulence patterns aligns with modern satellite imagery of airflow. Physicists studying his art found that his swirls follow the Kolmogorov model of fluid dynamics. He instinctively painted mathematical truth. That suggests that his brain during psychosis was not random. It was hyperordered at a level below awareness. This observation reshapes how neuroscience views mental illness. Disordered perception may hide patterns of deeper order. In creative individuals, those hidden patterns become visible through art. Vincent's work shows how the brain can use dysfunction to create new forms of understanding. The link between genius and madness is no longer myth. Brain science now defines it as cognitive disinhibition, combined with high intelligence and motivation. It means the brain allows unusual connections and has the skill to express them. Vincent had both. He lacked only stability and medical support. His case influenced early psychiatry in the 20th century. Doctors used his letters to illustrate how mood, emotion, and perception interact. His story helped move mental illness from superstition to science. Even Sigmund Freud referenced him when exploring the relationship between creativity and neurosis. Today, neuroscientists use digital imaging and genetics to trace the same traits that once destroyed him. They find that many creative geniuses share similar risk genes for bipolar and schizophrenia spectrum disorders. These genes affect dopamine regulation and sensory gating. They make perception more intense and emotional memory stronger. In moderation, they produce innovation. In excess, they cause breakdown. Vincent's life sits exactly on that border. His genius was not despite his illness, but intertwined with it. He painted the mind from inside the storm. As science advances, his art becomes a visual textbook for researchers. It shows what the human brain can produce when logic fails, but beauty remains. His tragedy gave medicine a map of creative cognition. In the next part, we bring this journey full circle. We look at how Vincent's mind changed art, science, and our understanding of what it means to be human. Part 5 is about legacy, empathy, and the continuing dialogue between madness and meaning. After Vincent's death, his paintings began to travel farther than he ever did. Exhibitions appeared across Europe. Critics who once ignored him now called him revolutionary. His colors, his lines, and his honesty became the foundation of modern art. He had painted emotions before psychology had words for them. Theo's widow, Johanna collected his letters and showed the world the man behind the paintings. Those letters revealed the logic within his madness. They showed that he was not just a victim of illness. He was a thinker who studied light, color, and faith with scientific focus. She preserved his voice so that medicine and art could both learn from it. As the 20th century unfolded, psychiatrists began using his writings in medical schools. They showed how psychosis could coexist with awareness. Students read his description of hearing voices and seeing halos of color around people. They realized that madness was not always chaos. Sometimes it was extreme sensitivity. Neuroscience grew from that idea. By the 1960s, brain researchers connected his experiences to the temporal lobe and dopamine systems. They discovered that these regions regulate both imagination and emotion. Too much activity created hallucinations. Balanced activity produced creativity. Vincent had lived at the intersection of the two. His influence extended to artists as well. Expressionism, abstract art, and surrealism all grew from his vision. Painters learned that emotion could replace realism. Writers and filmmakers began exploring characters who saw the world differently. Through Vincent, society started to understand mental illness as part of human diversity. The modern movement for mental health awareness owes something to him. He humanized suffering. He showed that a person can be brilliant, unstable, and still meaningful. When people today talk about creative burnout or emotional overload, they echo his letters. He was one of the first to describe that experience. Medical historians now call him one of the earliest documented cases of art-based therapy. His work demonstrates how creating visual order helps regulate brain chemistry. Hospitals around the world now use painting and music as treatment for trauma and psychosis. The same principles that kept him alive now heal others. His story also changed how scientists view genius. For centuries, genius was seen as divine inspiration. Vincent's life reframed it as brain function. It showed that brilliance is not a gift from above, but a side effect of extreme neural wiring. That shift shaped modern cognitive neuroscience. Researchers studying creativity today still refer to the Van Gogh pattern. It means high sensitivity, deep emotion, obsessive focus, and vulnerability to breakdown. They use his example to teach that the goal is not to suppress intensity, but to guide it. With understanding and support, the same wiring that produced his suffering can produce progress. Vincent once wrote to Theo that sadness will last forever. But he was wrong. His sadness did not last. His art replaced it. It became a shared language for emotion that outlived pain. Museums that hold his paintings report that visitors often cry without knowing why. That is the neuroscience of empathy. When we see his colors and motion, our mirror neurons activate. Our brains recreate his emotion. In that moment, the viewer and the painter share one perception. His mind continues to communicate through ours. This is what makes his story timeless. It is not only about madness or art, it is about the human brain searching for meaning under pressure. It is proof that beauty can grow from disorder. It reminds us that creativity and illness are not opposites but neighbors. When scientists map the brain, they often use color to represent activity. The scans look like abstract paintings. In a way, every brain is painting itself from the inside out. Vincent just showed us first. Today, his work hangs in the world's greatest museums. People stand before the Starry Night and feel movement that cannot be explained. They see the same turbulence that lives in the air and in the mind. They see evidence that chaos and order can exist together. Vincent's life asks one question that still matters. How much of genius is control, and how much is surrender? He surrendered completely, and in doing so he revealed the structure of madness itself. He turned the language of illness into the language of art. He made the invisible visible. His legacy lives in both galleries and laboratories. Painters study his technique. Neuroscientists study his perception. Psychologists study his letters. Every field still tries to understand what he already knew instinctively. That pain and beauty are made of the same substance. When we look at his work today, we are not just seeing paint on canvas. We are seeing a human brain expressing itself through light. That is the real neuroscience of genius.